Hello and welcome to the Cyberden, your weekly dose of tech and games. I, Jake, will be chatting with professional voiceover artist and radio DJ Corey Cruz, better known as the other voice of the Postal Dude from the controversial cult classic Postal series. Thanks for coming, mate.
It's an honor and pleasure to be on your show, Jake. Thank you for this audio. Within reason, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm not going to edit it and make you say white power or something like that, don't worry.
Yeah, I guess that would fall within the within reason category, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, like I say, over to you. How did you enter the world of voiceovers?
Well, I guess I entered the world of voiceovers through being a part of the radio industry because directly out of college, I went straight into being a DJ for rock and roll radio stations back in the late 80s. That kind of dates me a little bit. However, that's when it happened. And through being a disc jockey in the United States, one of the regular jobs you end up doing at the radio station is voiceovers for commercials, for advertisements. And I immediately was asked by my employers to be a part of the commercials that they were selling and learned very quickly how to do that sort of artistry. And have been doing that for pushing 30 years now, I suppose, and have had a really interesting career as far as the variety of things that I've been able to do, including the Postal video game. That was one of the highlights and most unusually interesting jobs that I've had over the years.
Now, Postal 3. Let's jump right into that. Postal 3 focused on the Postal Dude's escapades in the town of Catharsis, allowing players to be a good guy or just gun down and tinkle everyone they saw fit. So, how exactly did you get the role for the game, and what was your reaction when you saw the goofy, disturbing, and rude dialogue?
Well, I had become aware of the Postal video game series ahead of actually getting the job for Postal 3, of course. So I was aware of the nature, the graphicness, some of the elements involved as far as where the game goes. So when I was given the opportunity to do that, it wasn't out of the blue as far as the blue nature of some of the video gameplay and all of that. And I was pulled in to do the game by I believe you have had a chance to talk with or know of Mike and Vince, the creators, the creative force behind the video game. And Mike lives here in the same city that I live, and he has used a lot of voiceover people and random people, I believe, too, on occasion, to be different characters and bit parts in the game. And when whatever went down with Rick Hunter, who is a friend of mine here in the same city, and they were unable to use him for the third game, I'm actually not sure where Mike came across my skills, and I think it may have been a friend of a friend kind of a thing here in the city we live in, which is a city of about 1 million people. And he gave me a call one day and then came down to the radio station a few days later to meet with me and basically hired me on the spot to do the voiceover for the dude in Postal 3. And it was really kind of surprising for me to get a job like that, and quite exciting at the same time.
Thing is, though, Postal 3 was pretty controversial, not necessarily because of the strong content and the rude jokes, etc., but more so because it was considered one of the worst games ever made, mostly because on release, it was just such a bug-filled mess, all thanks to the Russian code developers that took over and completely ruined it, simply put. So, what are your thoughts about this?
I'm actually not really invested or involved in a lot of that end of the game because, honestly, for me, Jake, it was a gig. It was a job along the way in my career, and I am a family man. I am a guy who's been married for 25 years. I have a 21-year-old daughter, and that sort of element, it wasn't something I was involved in myself, obviously, and I wasn't a big gamer myself either. I'm not playing the video games of that nature.
Still, it must be reassuring to know that many fans of the Postal series, even though they weren't fond of the game itself, they did especially enjoy your performance.
That's really good to hear, actually. I didn't at any point go online or hear of any reviews or anything of that nature regarding the work that I had done on the game. And that was actually, to be perfectly honest with you, that was really my first foray into voice acting on a video game or character acting in that sort of a way. So there was a lot of experimentation involved with the way I use my voice, as far as comparing it to the way I use my voice for radio commercials, for example, or for using my voice for video narrations or internet narrations, which I've done a lot of as well. So it was definitely a different world to be a part of as far as voice acting was concerned for me at the time. And I believe this was now 7, 8 years ago. Correct my math if I'm wrong.
Yeah, good enough for me. Good enough for me.
Something like that.
Yeah. Still, you managed to get some extra lines as well for example, the expansion pack for Postal 2, Paradise Lost, and you were happy to reprise the role of the other Postal Dude?
Yes, that's right. Mike called me like a few years ago now regarding that and asked if I would be willing and interested in doing some more work for that. And I said, well, of course, I'd love to. I'd love the opportunity to work on that some more. And those parts were actually recorded here in the studio that I'm in now at the radio station. Mike would come over here and we laid some of those lines down and worked on them in conjunction with each other. And Mike would occasionally come over himself and do some of the recordings for some of that. We also went to Rick Hunter's studio in another part of this city and did some of those lines over there. That was really interesting and fun to have Rick and I in the same room working on that project.
So you would definitely say that you enjoyed playing the Postal Dude. Any lines that you remember that you enjoyed saying?
Oh, wow. I knew I should have pulled out one of the old scripts to help me with this part of the interview. I can't actually. I mean, boy, you'd have to give me a line or something to say, because I don't recall any of the specific lines. I've done so many scripts in so many different arenas for so many years.
I think one of my favourite lines was, I haven't played Postal 3, thankfully. I checked out the endings and the clips online. I thought, hey, I like this voice for the new Postal Dude. I think the bad ending, when Postal Dude saves the day, then gets executed and sent to heaven, and he's just like, am I a shoo-in for heaven? And St. Peter's there saying, like, you honestly tried to fool me, mate. Sorry, but you're going to go to hell. And you just nonchalantly go, oh, well, can't blame a guy for trying. And then you get dropped to hell, just like, I regret nothing!
I regret nothing! So am I a shoo-in for heaven or what?
That's the one.
Does that sound about like what I said?
Yeah, I believe it was. Yeah, that segment alone, I thought that was definitely worth watching.
Yeah, they definitely came up with some very off-the-wall and interesting concepts in the development of those games, to say the least.
So, were there any other voice acting roles out there that stood out to you?
Well, doing that role in the Postal game was definitely the most unique thing I've done. A lot of the other projects that I've worked on are very industrial and commercial in nature, as far as I've done projects for national advertisers here in the United States. I have worked on projects for Defense Department contractors that would, to the average person, would be really quite boring, I suppose. However, they're very necessary within their industries, and they also pay the bills too, which is very helpful in this line of work.
So next time we stumble into the workplace or have to watch a tedious video, we might end up hearing, You saying over the speakers, "Now be sure to keep in mind that you're not supposed to do this and that. Do not eat the fire extinguisher. Do not throw children outside the window. This is all very important safety measures. But remember, if you if you do this sort of stuff, regret nothing."
Regret nothing. I think I worked on that project 3 weeks ago, yes.
Now, you've done your fair share of radio work, more specifically on both KLPX 96.1 FM and Rock 102.1 KFMA. Tell us a bit more about them. How long have you been on the airwaves for, and what kind of music can we expect when you're on the air?
Well, I have actually worked for this company for nearly 25 years here in Tucson, Arizona, and it is a group that has 4 radio stations, 2 of which are rock and roll radio stations, and the other 2 are Spanish language radio stations. We're actually, where we're situated in the U.S., we are very close to the Mexican border, and we have a lot of people of mixed ethnicity who speak Spanish and English. So therefore the Spanish stations here, which I am not bilingual. I do not speak Spanish. I speak just a little bit. But so I do not work on those 2 stations. But the 2 rock stations that we have, I work primarily here. My day job, so to speak, is as the production director, which means I'm an audio recording specialist. Obviously, I use my voice on commercials, but I also am very, very experienced with audio editing and recording and producing and directing and writing for commercials and promos. I'm not exactly sure how you guys do that within your radio stations on that side of the ocean, but over here we have a few people in the building who specialize in those things at our radio stations, and I'm that guy here in our radio group. I also get to spend a couple of times a month, I go on the air on KLPX, which anybody listening can go to www.klpx.com. That is our radio station website, obviously. And you can stream that station. So I get to fill in for some of the disc jockeys on there occasionally during the weekdays. And that is a classic rock station, which pretty much is self-explanatory. And that's a lot of fun. I don't get, when I first got into the radio world, that is why I got into radio, was to be a disc jockey and to play the rock and roll, because I've been a big fan of music since my pubescent years, if you will. And to get to do that for a living, it ultimately was, I don't want to say a dream come true, but it's sort of, I guess, this type of work found me, in a sense, being that I was able to take my love for music and this unusual voice that I have and put them together in a career. And that's, that was pushing 30 years ago, and here we are today. I'm still doing the same thing, primarily because I like to do it, and it comes naturally to me all at the same time. So it's kind of like taking my lifestyle and turning it into my work style. So I'm not heard as a disc jockey a lot of the times. It's maybe, as I said, 1 or 2 times a month for about a 4 to 5 hour period. And that's on KLPX. The other radio station we have is more of a newer, modern rock radio station with bands like Muse and Five Finger Death Punch and Stone Temple Pilots, bands like that, if you're familiar with them. So that is the other station, but I do not disc jockey on that one, but I produce a lot of commercials that air on both of those stations. And some of them have my voice on them, and some of them don't, because I also, one of my jobs within the radio station is working as the casting director for the voices within the station. And we, as many radio stations find themselves in the position of these days, we can only use the voices within the building to create the commercials and promos. We do not hire out for outside voiceovers. Otherwise, Jake, I would love to hire you for a voiceover.
If you do know anyone else who needs a voiceover artist, a thick British accent, then be sure to pass on Jake the Voice's details. I'm sure they won't mind.
Absolutely. You will be my #1 go-to guy with the British voice.
Yeah, it's reassuring to know. Thank you.
Authentic.
So, speaking of music, what would you say are some of your favorite bands?
Favorite artists for me, that would include, it's a pretty long list. How much time do you have? It would actually be along the lines in the rock and roll world of there's a band called Rush that you might be familiar with. Artists like Sting is one of my favorite artists. A band called Van Halen. Back when I was a teenager, I was very into artists like AC/DC and Judas Priest and Blue Oyster Cults, Deep Purple, the Beatles, of course, go with, you hardly even have to mention that. That's a given. And I really like rock and roll music, but I also enjoy other styles of music and appreciate them for what they are, the art that they are.
Maybe some of the tracks that we play here on the Cyberden, Siren FM, every Wednesday, 10 till 12, starring Jake the Voice. Maybe some of the lovely artists that we play might be of interest to you.
Well, and who might some of those artists be?
Well, we play, I like to play quite a bit of, for example, White Zombie / Rob Zombie, Alice in Chains, who else? Type O Negative, Rammstein.
Okay. Yeah, you see, you're going right up my alley. Like I said, how much time do you have? I could have kept listing artists like you said, Alice in Chains. I actually grew up in the state of Washington here in the U.S., which is where you're familiar with the term grunge rock, where Nirvana and Soundgarden and those guys came out of the Seattle area. So that was definitely my era, and I'm a big fan of artists like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Mother Love Bone, which was an earlier version of some of the grunge rock in Seattle. That's definitely right up my alley.
And remember, folks, you can check out these sort of great artists on the Cyberden Siren FM every Wednesday, 10 till 12, starring Jake the Voice. Anyway, so shameless plug.
You have very good taste.
Which is reassuring to know. Thank you very much. So, what do you like to do outside of voice work? Now, I noticed that you play bass for a band called Vintage Sugar. So how long has that been about?
Well, that actually, unfortunately, that band is no longer together because two of the bandmates moved out of the city about 2 years ago. So that was a project that I'm very proud to have been a part of. We created a lot of excellent, in our opinion, original music. Went into the studio and we put together a 5-song EP, professionally produced and recorded. We even produced a couple of amateur videos with a couple of those songs. And there was a very high level of talent in the band, aside from myself. The artist I was playing with, the vocalist, she was incredible. The guitarist was an amazing guitar player. The keyboardist was actually a music professor, so he really knew his stuff. And the drummer in the band was a professional drummer. Yet we all had day jobs on the side, so it was a lot of fun to be a part of that project. We played a lot of the clubs, the main clubs around this city, and we also had the opportunity to open up a concert for Vince Neil of Motley Crue and Great White, those bands. That was definitely the highlight of that band's career. So we had a lot of fun with that. We also played a lot of cover songs. We covered major artists and did that a lot in the clubs. That was a really good time. Since then, I've had to move on because the band split up due to people moving out of town, and I've played around in a couple of other projects here in town, and it is pretty much my primary hobby, if you will, these days. For quite a long time, I was more in the athletics world and sporting world and played a lot of recreational sports like roller hockey and flag football, American football, that is. And then I started to get a little bit older and was unable to perform at the level I wanted to do the athletics at, and so I switched back to playing music. From a bass guitar standpoint, which is something I did through high school and on into college, and it was a lot of fun to sort of resurrect that part of my hobby interests as an adult, and get to have the fun that I'm now having playing in these bands. Currently, I'm playing in 2 bands. One of them plays very hard-edged cover music. of the likes of Godsmack and Hoobastank and Volbeat, if you're familiar with those artists, which I'm sure are regulars on Jake the Voice's program, right?
Well, now that you mention them, I'm sure I can slip a few in here and there.
Feel free to edit that if you want. The other band, now this is something that has been a lot of fun. About a year ago, some coworkers of mine here in the radio station and I were talking, and our interests and abilities in music came out in discussion. And we realized, well, you play guitar and you play drums. Well, I play bass. Well, let's make a radio station band. And so we did. And two guys play guitar. We have a drummer inside the building who works for one of our radio stations, and I play bass. And we convinced our boss, the general manager of the radio station group, to let us use part of one of the studios here in our radio facility to use as a practice room. So we got together and we started practicing a certain amount of classic rock songs, and it actually sounded pretty good, to a point where we thought, well, gee, if we only had a singer, this would be great, because none of us are vocalists on any level of trying to be the front man of a band. We could all sing backup vocals, but not lead vocals. That's a whole different animal in a band. It takes a special person to be able to do that. So we thought, well, how about if we put a radio station promotion together looking for a singer? And we ran that by our boss, and he gave it the green light. And within a few months, we had a full promotion going and put it on the air, calling for auditions for singers for our radio station band. Now, this was for the KLPX station, the classic rock station, and in flooded all these auditions online, and we were able to sort through those, narrow it down to 8 people, and we had the live auditions at one of the casinos here in town that has a big stage and lighting. And from those 8 people, we narrowed it down to a finalist, and that person won a cash prize and also the opportunity to join our band and play around town at various gigs. That's the whole thing in a nutshell. And to this day, we are still doing that. And we named the Band X, playing off of the radio station KLPX. And we've had a lot of fun with that and some really good results. We incorporate the performances into some of the radio station's outside promotions if we're doing an event somewhere in town or what have you. And also we've been hired by a few events and other organizations in town to play their events. So it's kind of almost accidentally turned into this animal that is a lot of fun to run around with, if you will.
Corey, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for coming to this interview.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on, Jake.
Now, before we go, is there anything you'd like to say to the many Postal fans out there?
Well, you kind of caught me off guard with that one. Do I deserve this? Is that a line that I said in the game?
Maybe.
Don't ever take yourself too seriously, or this is how you'll end up. I don't know. That's about all I've got on that, Jake. I should have taken out some of my old scripts, which I probably still have at my house, and looked at them for better material for you.
You should have just prepared a speech just saying, these are the people I would like to thank in particular. Mike J, Vince Dacey, myself, of course, and these various other characters.
Yes. Absolutely. I'd like to thank Mike and Vince, and absolutely 100% Jake the Voice.
Oh, I know that guy. He's so awesome. Such a cool dude.
Oh, excellent. I hope that I've provided you with enough and maybe not too much material. Sometimes I tend to ramble on a little bit.
I've got plenty here that I'm sure the many, many Postal fans out there would love to listen to.
All right. Well, I hope that I sounded enough like the Postal Dude, because I might sound different now than I did 8 years ago. Or maybe I don't. I don't know.
We'll let the fans decide and argue and battle one another about that for another day. So I personally would like to thank my lovely listeners out there for tuning into this great interview on the Cyberden, your weekly dose of tech and games. See you, Corey, and let me just say, I regret nothing.